Hey everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at my updated raid build utilising some of the essences from the last update. Let's go. Now I'm aware there's quite a few wizard builds out there already for really high damage. I haven't actually watched any of these yet myself, simply because I really like to test my own builds. Game Zone is the same. We both generally test stuff ourselves before we put anything on YouTube, and I like to come up with my own builds as well. I don't really like to rely on other people's testing. I always like to do it myself. So I'm using a few of the new essences here and a few skills that I always use, like the Rift Carver main hand essence I'm using as always for Arcane Torrent, because that just works really well with the Eternal gear that I have for that. But you can see already we're over 100 million damage, just over 30 seconds. So with raid builds, it needs to be sustained damage rather than just a 10-second burst. There's no point testing just for 10 seconds and being like, oh yeah, there's loads of damage, if it's not actually sustainable like it is in this build. So coming up to the minute mark now, we're almost there and we are very close to 200 million damage. Are we going to hit that before we get to 1 minute? Yes, we are. So you can see in 1 minute, I didn't pause it quite on time, but in 1 minute we've got over 200 million damage there, and just under 3.5 million damage per second as well from this build. So let's take a look at the breakdown. You can see the main damage in this build now is actually coming from Lightning Nova. Arcane Torrent has really taken a back seat in this, and so has Disintegrate. And that is because the essences that we have stacked on Lightning Nova, it just makes it super powerful. So let's take a look now at essences and what we're using. So starting off with set items, we're using 4 pieces of Vitus. As always, this increases the duration of beneficial effects on you or your party by 30% and increases the target attack speed by 30% for 3 seconds each time you use a skill to grant a beneficial effect to yourself or to a party member. Alongside this, I'm using 4 pieces of Grace. All continual damage, channel damage and persistent ground damage is increased by 15%. And each time you damage an individual enemy 5 times, you will deal 18,807 additional damage to that enemy. Now, I still use Grace just because I don't have enough wisps to craft new sets, but also this works with the damage over time that we've got from several of my legendary gems in this build as well. Moving on to Helm, we're using Autumnal Crest. So this one is new, and the slow time now surrounds you with a static field that follows you, damaging and applying shock to all nearby enemies. Slow time damage is increased 18% and an additional 10% from the Awaken slot there as well. So you can see I also have the Cursed property active on this gear and 3 other pieces as well, which is Lashed. Your primary attack now has a chance to generate 3 cracking whips that target nearby enemies and deal 24% of your damage per second over 3 seconds to any enemies in their path. Additionally, when an enemy dies while taking damage from a whip, it will explode for 12% of your damage. So this is actually a really good curse property, and I use 2 different curse properties on this build as well, which you'll see the other one in a second. So now moving on, we have on the chest also a new essence. So this is Isolated Storm. Lightning Nova now calls a lightning orb to orbit you, dealing lightning damage to enemies it hits. Lightning Nova damage is increased 18% and damage increased 10% from the Awaken slot on that as well. So you can see here the other curse property I have active is Wired. So after you kill an enemy, release a surge of lightning that jumps 6 times between nearby enemies and deals 60% of your damage to them. Additionally, damage dealt to enemies hit by a surge is increased by 9%. An effect cannot occur more often than once every 15 seconds. So this works really nicely, this curse property, in with this whole build. We're using Filtered Defense on the shoulder. Disintegrate now surrounds you with an entropy field that follows you, damaging and making nearby enemies vulnerable to critical hits. Disintegrate damage is increased 18% and an additional 10% there from the Awaken slot as well. On the pants, another favourite is Novel Castigation. Arcane Torrent also fires tracking missiles that seek out enemies, dealing 13,533 damage, and damage is increased 90% and an additional 10% from the Awakened slot. Obviously that is paired with Rift Carver on the main hand. Arcane Torrent now creates a Celtic Orb that moves with you and fires arcane missiles at random nearby enemies. Arcane Torrent damage is increased 18% and an additional 10% from the Awakened slot. Alternatively to this, I would look at stacking damage to your primary attack. So Trifling Piffle on the offhand. When Lightning Nova hits a shocked enemy, it unleashes another Lightning Nova and cannot occur more often than every 4.5 seconds. Lightning Nova cooldown is decreased by 10%, and this is again really strong and stacks really nicely with the Lightning Nova essences we're using. Radiant Splines on the alternate main hand. When Lightning Nova deals a critical hit, it emits a charged bolt that deals 12,162 damage. Can occur more often than once every 1 second, and damage is increased 90%. Lightning Nova damage is also increased 10% from the awakened slot, so loads of damage stacking on Lightning Nova. Blaster Cast on the alternate offhand. Magic Missile fires 2 additional missiles, each dealing 5,082 damage, and damage is increased 90%. Damage increased 10% from the awakened slot. So like I said, instead of Rift Carver, you could always use a main hand that's going to give more damage on primary. But the reason I'm still using it is because I do have this Arcane Torrent magic. As you can see, I have 2 pieces of that in this build. I also have some of the Lightning Nova magic active, so that increases my attack speed when I use Lightning Nova. So basically, the Eternal Gear is super strong still, and that's why I'm using specific skills. For gems, we're using Blood-Soaked Jade, which is always going to be one of my favourites. We're also using Starfire Shard, Roiling Consequence, Pain Clasp, Seeping Bile, Bottled Hope, Gloom Cask, and lastly, Mother's Lament as well. Now, my charm has increased damage for Arcane Torrent, Magic Missile, and Disintegrate as well. But alongside this, we'll just take a quick look at the paragon that I'm using. So as always, I'm using the Slinger Tree, and it's for the Unseen Dynamism. So this tree is pretty much stacking my damage and stacking my critical hit as well. So you can see here, while you have 10 or more stacks of Unseen Dynamism, you will gain Uncanny, which increases your critical hit chance by 6.5%. And obviously that works really well with the essences that we're using within this build. So now we're going to go ahead and test this out in a raid. I'm going to do this solo, and we'll see how quickly we can complete it. So as you can see, the raid that we're going to be completing with this build solo today is Uthmash Ka. The reason why I decided to choose this one is because of when he splits into different aspects. I thought it would be quite good to see how quickly we can take down each one, and also see if we can unlock the Hero's Journey tasks. So there's some new Hero's Journey tasks. One of them is for this raid specifically, and the other one is to complete an Inferno 2 raid within 3 minutes. So we're going to see if we can do that solo rather than in a party, which is definitely easy to do in a party, especially with my warband, because those guys are super strong. So the annoying thing with this raid, I find, is having to clear the mist and having to constantly activate these lanterns. But yeah, I guess that's just part of the so-called fun with it. But you can see really quickly taking down each aspect of Uthmash Ka here. I'm going to have to use that bloody lantern again. But yeah, this build is pretty strong. You basically just walk into the aspects and it takes them down, which is amazing. It's basically like when you're open world farming. Now, just under 7 million life left, and health is going down really quickly. I think we're going to defeat this before it gets into the next phase. But yeah, really nice and easy build to use. I'm sure there are stronger versions out there. Let me know what you would change in this. I think the answer for a lot of people would be that they'd swap out Arcane Torrent. I might test it out again and try swapping that out for something else. I'd be interested to know what skill you guys would use. But we have managed to complete both of those tasks in the Hero's Journey as well. So that's it from me today. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.